Thank you for coming along to our second legal debate of the year. For those of you that were last one, we had Kenneth Clark and Michael Howard and others really going at it around Brexit. We had some really great debate around how Brexit will create a talent drain in the UK. And I think for those of you that are familiar with the format of the legal debates, we really want to make sure the debate part comes out really strongly. I'm sat in the middle, so these guys can really go to town on each other. And we're hoping today will be a really feisty, kind of energetic, possibly angry, but certainly passionate debate that really gets the place rocking. So no pressure, guys. So we've been in a conference today where we talked quite a lot around diversity and gender equality, and we were very proud to talk about our Transforming Women in Leadership programme. We've been talking about how we're looking to influence and lead and perhaps drive behaviour change in the legal profession, but from perhaps an altruistic viewpoint, or one where law firms and in-house can see the inherent commercial advantages of really promoting a more diverse workplace. So today, and perhaps previously, has been about how we can influence and drive behaviour change. But the debate tonight is really about whether that's enough, and whether, as legal professionals, we need to put in place much stricter quotas to really drive this behaviour change. Will that get us to where we want to get to quicker, more successfully than perhaps trying to drive a shorter term change? So very shortly we'll announce some of the early results from you guys. I'm sure you're all swiping left and right on the way in. Just for clarity, I've never swiped left or right on an app before, despite what one of my colleagues suggested. And we'll have a look at how you voted against that on the way in. And dependent on how persuasive and passionate and informed and articulate, again, no pressure, my esteemed colleagues are today, we'll rerun that at the end and see whether they have actually influenced your beliefs on this really, really important topic. So I'll just briefly introduce the panel and let them give a short overview of their background and current roles. So in the for camp, we have Catherine Mayer, who's from the Women's Equality Party, and Charlotte Proudman from Goldsmith Chambers. And I'd like to invite you both just to give the audience a short introduction to who you are.
Sure. I'm a long-time journalist, author, and I, in 2015, co-founded the Women's Equality Party.
I'm a barrister at Goldsmith Chambers. I specialise in family law and public law, immigration as well. And I'm also a passionate feminist, and I've been a very vigorous supporter of quotas for women in the judiciary for a long time.
Very good use of the word vigorous, trying to influence the audience vote there. So, good adjectives. And on the against, we have our very own Vivian Arts, so welcome. And Justin, broadcaster and journalist, welcome also.
Hello everyone, my name is Vivian Arts. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Thomson Reuters. I've worked in the banking and financial services sector for about 20 years. I'm a lawyer as well. But more importantly for this evening is I'm also president of Women in Banking and Finance, and I am a passionate feminist. And I have been involved in many gender networks, setting up gender networks, setting up diversity networks, being involved. So I'm really looking forward to the debate tonight.
And I'm Justin Webb. I present the Today programme on Radio 4. I used to be the BBC's North America editor. Before that, I was a roving reporter around the world. And I worked with the BBC since 1984. During which time I've seen considerable changes, including changes in this area, and I am proud and happy to say that I have been a man who has been bossed by women at work, actually throughout my career, but increasingly now commonly and almost universally. And my current boss is a woman, and her boss as well. We have a lot of bosses in the BBC. So on this subject, I am something of an expert.
Thank you both. And just a quick hand again for our great panel. Make them feel welcomed. So hopefully on the screen was the results. Could we flash those back up, please? So at the moment it's pretty close in the voting, but a slight shift towards against. In the time-honoured tradition of Thomson Reuters debates, I will hand over to the for side to kick this off. And each of you will have, and I think we're very strict on this, been reliably informed, you will have an 8-minute...
No, 10 minutes.
Oh no, that's the... Honestly, some people already trying to influence.
We have to stand up for our rights.
Kaylee, are we allowing 10?
10 with an 8-minute warning.
I will be strict on the 8-minute warning. So we have 10 minutes. So please take the floor and best of luck.
It's not an unfamiliar sensation for me being in a room full of lawyers. The reason for this is that for the past 3.5 years I've been in litigation using equality law to try and seek justice for myself. I sued my former employer, Time magazine, for sex and age discrimination. It was a stressful experience, but one that I have never regretted. I filed in the US, where of course filings are public. The media picked up on the story there. And this encouraged other people to come forward in unexpected and ultimately helpful ways. You may have seen reported in the papers here that my case has reached an amicable resolution, so a happy ending. And I hope that my story continues to embolden others to seek redress where necessary. But having said that, it's not an experience I would wish on anyone. Companies and institutions should not have to be forced to do right by their employees. However, sometimes laws are important, and not just for this point about seeking redress for individuals, but also as a way to create and anchor institutional change. Quotas are like that. Quotas are a brilliant way of creating and anchoring institutional change. Meaningful quotas I'm talking about. Now, I do want to caveat one thing about the way the motion is phrased tonight. It says the only solution to gender equality. Quotas work brilliantly with other measures. They are less impactful on their own. Quotas are about ripping open the doors to let more people in. You then have to make sure that what space you are letting them into is not so hostile that you immediately lose people again. But quotas are essential. If warm words and targets without teeth were enough, we'd be a hell of a lot closer to parity than we are in so many fields. Why I say that is that the business case for equality is so absolutely unequivocal. You'll have seen all of the research. I'll mention just one piece of it, McKinsey's recent Delivering Through Diversity report. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams are 21% more likely to be above average profitability, and they do better on things like EBIT and EP margins as well. That's because diversity has never been about box ticking. It's about recruiting and retaining from the widest possible talent pool. It reduces the huge danger of groupthink. It helps companies to connect with their markets. And it means legislatures that are actually representative of the populations they're meant to serve. And by the way, when we're talking about quotas, the only countries in the world with parliaments that have reached parity are using quotas. Nowhere has reached parity without them. The self-interest in gender equality is so clear for the reasons I've just given that it's quite obvious too that something else must be getting in the way of progress. Well, what could that be? I've spent recent years examining that, trying to delineate structural barriers and dismantle them. I wrote a book called Attack the 50-Foot Women that looks into this area. And of course, as I mentioned, I co-founded the Women's Equality Party. We, from the very beginning, recommended short-term quotas for boards, but also for the very crucial executive committee level, because it's not enough just looking at the top and leaving the lower levels in companies to chance, and also quotas for legislatures. Now, our absent chair, Peter, wanted to focus on workplace quotas and was worried about me talking about political quotas. My comeback on this is that legislatures are workplaces, and they're incredibly dysfunctional ones, as the slew of harassment stories coming out of Westminster tells you. I worked as a lobby correspondent for many years, and I experienced a lot of this directly, and also how clubby it was. The fact that behind the scenes it was all about male advisors, it was all about male media, and so again this groupthink was a really big problem. People club with people that they feel comfortable with. They hire people they feel comfortable with. You see in the chambers it also works in elections. 68% of MPs are men, 74% of peers are men, and most of them are white men from kind of comfortable middle-class backgrounds who have experienced equality in their lives as the air they breathe. They have not been confronted with the reality of inequality. And when they are, they're quite often puzzled by it, and they think some fairly funny things, like that women choose their lower status. We actually apparently want to be paid less or not to get these top jobs because we're just different. But you can talk to me about choice at the point when children are not bombarded from their earliest years with gendered messages or streamed into boy and girl subjects, where there's no more conscious or unconscious bias in hiring, where there is properly funded shared parental leave so that the higher earning partner, who of course because of the gender pay gap is typically a man, can afford to take it, and when there is universal childcare. Firms should be lobbying government to create these necessary frameworks, because otherwise they can spend what they like on diversity. It's not going to be as effective as it should be. We've all seen the vicious circle. The women told that they're not fit to join a board because they haven't had the experience of being on a board. The FTSE 100, just 9% of the women leading companies are women, the women are women, and 29% of directors. Some people are rather proud of that 29% figure because it was reached by targets rather than quotas, but actually a really high number of those are non-executive directors without operational input, and the number has stayed static for a year, and there's nothing to stop it from dropping sharply, which is exactly what's happened with the FTSE 250, where there has been this precipitate drop in women engaged at board level. That's right. Quotas aren't just for wrenching open the doors, they're for stopping backsliding, and we really need that. Opponents will tell you that they promote mediocrity. I have to agree in one sense alone, and that is that there is already a worldwide quota in operation, and it's in favour of men. The London School of Economics has done some work on this, where gender quotas are deployed to get more women in. It actually helps to weed out mediocrity. I talked before about sitting down with lawyers. I obviously noticed the lack of diversity in the law profession during my litigation, but I noticed something else. Some of the men, when talking about discrimination, which was the subject of my case, really couldn't understand it viscerally, however much they got the technical side of it. I was very lucky. I was represented by a brilliant female lawyer, Anne Oliverius. She brought to the table not just the many years of experience of employment law, but also her lived experience. Sometimes that's really important. In November, there was a roundup of how the big UK law firms are doing with their gender quotas. The headline, they were struggling. So my final point in this section about why we need quotas is because when targets become quotas, suddenly people stop struggling. It just happens. We need gender equality because not only of fairness and it being good for women, but because it is good for companies, it is good for the economy, it is good for the law profession, it is good for everyone. So I commend this motion to you.
It's brave of you, in a way, of you, to have invited a BBC person to come here and talk, because, of course, the big problem with BBC people is actually we've got to be quite impartial. So while I hope I'll be relatively feisty, I'm certainly not angry, and actually I could equally, I think, genuinely have spoken on either side of this. But there is a big problem for BBC people who come and say nothing, and that was very much brought home to actually someone who did my job in America before me, previous editor, North America editor in Washington, who was rung by one of the big US TV stations just before Christmas and asked what he wanted for Christmas. And being a BBC man and thinking, gosh, I've got to be cautious in case it's the Daily Mail, let me just be, let me be ultra cautious. And he said, well, really nothing, thank you, I don't want anything. And just as he was about to put the phone down, his eye lighted on his sideboard, because they had sideboards in those days, and on the sideboards was a small box of liqueur chocolates. So he said, that's a small box of liqueur chocolates if you must get me something. Put the phone down, thought no more about it. Christmas came, and the anchor, I think in those days, probably Walter Cronkite, looked into the screen and said, we've been asking the bosses of some important foreign broadcasters based here in the United States what they want to see for Christmas. The boss of TF1, the French national station, said, no more war. The boss of Deutsche Welle, the German station, said an end to world poverty. And the boss of the BBC said a small box of liqueur chocolates. So, mindful of that, I feel that I do have a need to say something. It's quite important that I don't hide behind that BBC thing, having got my important caveat in first, that actually these are not the views of the BBC, or indeed necessarily would be my views if I was on the Today programme. Now, Barack Obama, elected in 2008, the morning after the election, all the American newspapers, there are rather pedantic headlines that they have. 44th president is Obama, black man elected to top job, etc., etc., etc. One paper I thought that day caught the essential ambivalence of the moment, and that was The Onion, the satirical paper. And their headline was, Black Man Given Nation's Worst Job. And what was obvious from Obama's rise to power and from his struggles during his time there this was not Buggins' turn. This was not a man who was there because it is right that he was there. It was right that he was there, but that was not the reason why he was there. This was someone who had struggled and honed, and I think that is the key point, honed his own abilities and his career to making it that far. That meant compromises along the way. That meant changes in the way that he approached problems. That meant all the ducking and weaving that all politicians do and that all leaders actually have to do, but also coming to terms with those ducks and those weaves, as it were, himself as an individual. And all those things, I think, made him a better candidate and arguably a better president. Fast forward then to Hillary Clinton, of whom you could also say it was right that she ran, and had she won, it would have righted an historic wrong and set America on a wiser and better trajectory. All those things could be said of Hillary Clinton. But the key to why he succeeded and she didn't, it seemed to me, is that among her supporters, there was not this real sense of what it was she wanted to do outside the equality issue. And the communication of that to ordinary Americans was faulty. And I think it's because too many of them thought, and in fact some of them even said it, it's our turn. It is right. And it was their turn. God knows it was rather more than their turn. But the very fact of thinking it, of believing it, it seems to me damaged Hillary Clinton's campaign. And I think there are risks in imposing quotas in any place, whether it's a small-scale workplace or a widespread political system, where it leads to people thinking, it's not what people think, it's not what outsiders think of you, it's actually what you think of yourself when you're doing that job and how you got to do that job. It's actually the way you have got there yourself personally. And I think one of the real lessons, certainly from the Clinton-Obama experience, has been that there is a damaging propensity among some people to think quotas, to internalize quotas, to think because something is fair and right and just, that alone is the way to get there. And I think in human relationships and in offices and in all workplaces, we all know that that is not always enough. And I think that is the big danger here. And the other danger that I mentioned more briefly, but my 18-year-old daughter was very keen that I do. My 18-year-old daughter is not a great fan of the Today programme, I'm sad to tell you. And one of the reasons she says she doesn't listen is that she says we treat women as victims. And I said, how so? And she had a particular example, actually, a series that actually I thought was a rather good series that we ran in the run-up to the centenary of women getting the right to vote here. And we had a range of women on over a period of weeks who talked about their heroes from times gone by during the course of that 100 years. And there were some people of whom I'd certainly never heard and who had extraordinary struggles, some of them successful, some of them less so, in very different times. And one of the things Martha, though, my daughter, said is, I'm just sick of hearing about struggle. I believe that I can get to where I want to get to without anyone lending me a hand. And I think it is dangerous to speak to people of my daughter's generation in a sense that persuades them that they are anything other than fully autonomous, fully able members of society. Even, frankly, if, as we all know, that's a bit of a fiction because there are all sorts of disadvantages that women still labour under. It's the addressing of those disadvantages. It's the addressing of workplace disadvantages. It's the addressing of the way that society is set up that is where the work has got to come and where the work is being done. My mother, in 1961, gave birth to me without a job and without much of a life because she had been sacked because she was having an illegitimate child. Sacked from the Daily Mirror, of all places, for having an illegitimate child. She told me how she went home on the bus, how her entire life changed, how she decided she wanted to keep the child, how she decided that she was going to get through that period of her life. Fast forward to today, and you have so many women who are still laboring under so many multiple oppressions, but what you do have is genuine progress between that day in 1961 and now. If you lose sight of the progress that's been made, if you replace the constant pushing for progress with a heavy-handed system that creates more troubles than it's worth, or creates a separate set of troubles and difficulties, I think you run the risk of going backwards. So my contention, unfeisty, certainly unangry, and hugely respectful of our opponents today, my contention is that gender equality is not going to be properly served by quotas in the workplace or indeed anywhere else. Thank you.
Well, in the spirit of anger, I'm just going to get this out of the way. I am an angry feminist. I'm just going to say it, I am. And I'm not going to apologise for that. Now, you might think of angry feminists as bra-burning, hairy armpitted women. But rest assured, I'm not going to fling out my bra anytime soon. Not least because it'd be a health and safety hazard. But I doubt I'll be back. I doubt very much I'll be invited back here again. But by the way, the story about bra burning was a story that was written by men, and it was written to do so in order to ridicule and sexualize our suffragette sisters. Now, you're probably wondering why it is that I'm angry. I'm a privileged woman. I'm 30 years old, I'm still young, I'm in the prime of my life, and I'm from a fairly standard middle-class background, you know, the kind that watches X Factor on a Saturday and Coronation Street on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and occasionally repeat on Sunday. I'm educated, I'm from a single-parent background, and I'm clearly white. But despite my privilege, for the entirety of my life, as a child, as an adolescent, and now as an adult, I have experienced and continue to discrimination on the basis of my gender. And I want to share with you just a handful of examples of the types of discrimination that I've experienced along the way in which I've become now a barrister and a fellow at Cambridge. As a law student, I was groped in the back of a cab by a barrister on the way to court. I was told to send in a bikini photo of me when I applied for work experience as a solicitor in a firm. I had my foot sexually harassed very recently under a table at a dinner party. And then I was referred just the other week by a judge as a young lady in court in front of my client. I've been passed up for cases because men are considered to be more authoritative. I'm unable to join gentlemen's private members clubs where, incidentally, promotions are often stitched up and important discussions are made about business. So this has not only impacted upon me as an individual, as a human like yourself, but it's also impacted upon my professional career advancement. I have had to fight for every position that I find myself in. Now, you might think that, hey, my male peers, they also have to fight for the position that they find themselves in. It's a greasy career ladder. But I bet no man in this audience has been asked to send a photograph of themselves in a bikini in order to get work experience. So why is it that we as women should have to work double as hard as men simply to be recognised for the work that we do on a daily basis, and on top of that, we have to beat off sexual harassment and discrimination? That makes me really angry. But it's fairly obvious why we have to, because the structures of work that we all work in are built by white, privileged men, and they've been built that way for centuries. Those in privileged positions are all too happy to peddle the universal myth of meritocracy. The amount of times I've heard that when arguing for quotas. Well, meritocracy, it's subjective, it's socially constructed, and it's highly gendered. I want to speak about the need for gender quotas within the judiciary. It's something that I feel very passionate about. Just look at the Supreme Court. It's supposed to be the pinnacle of our justice system, and yet we have still just two women, I wish it was just two men, 2 women and 10 men in the Supreme Court, and that's taken, 100 or so years? And that's not because men possess a superior intellect to us women. I just want to throw that out there. Lord Thomson, who sits in the Supreme Court, he didn't get his position as a trainee barrister on merit alone. No, he got it, in his own words, because his father knew someone in Chambers. So there are ample women who I have the great pleasure of working alongside who could easily sit in those positions of power. They are often brilliant in court. And we know that A, men benefit from structural inequalities, B, meritocracy is a myth, and that when men hold a disproportionate balance of power and are unaccountable, they will abuse that power, as has been seen by the #MeToo campaign, which I'm sure we've all been following. We also know that men won't make room for women at the table, and that's been shown by the Fawcett Society in 2016 during a survey which found that 60% of people believe that men at the top won't make room for women unless they have to. Why would they want to redistribute power away from themselves and give it to women? So women, what are we going to do about it? That's the question. Now, I don't want a slice of the pie that's on offer anymore. That pie is well and truly past its sell-by date. I don't want to be the odd token woman in a position of power just simply to show that the system is doing just fine because I'm there. I want real and meaningful change. I want gender parity. I want to see role models for you, and you. I want to know that women are not being held back simply because of their gender. Up until recently, out of 47 European nations, only Azerbaijan and Armenia had lower proportions of women members of the judiciary. Now, that is a gross indictment upon our jurisdiction. And only around 76% of judges are men. I say only, it's shocking. And then you look at the High Court and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, where power and privilege is really held, and you see the small numbers of women that are sitting in those positions. Why is it that I'm so concerned about the judiciary? Well, decisions are made about our lives and about our bodies often by these men. They're made about FGM, they're made about abortion, they're made about rape, they're made even about deciding whether we can divorce or whether we remain chain women. They're made about what does it mean to be a prostitute according to the criminal justice system when you're a child? Does it mean that you need to be criminalized? And let's be honest, the majority of prostitutes are women and girls. So there are issues that still disproportionately affect women, and yet it's men that have the power to make decisions about our lives. And quite frankly, a lot of those decisions show male bias in their interpretation of gender relations to the detriment of women and society as a whole. And that makes me angry. So how are we going to address this gender equality in the halls of our justice system? It's common sense. We need a justice system, a judiciary that reflects our society, women from all walks of life. And yet I'm often met with the same patronizing argument whenever we talk about quotas. When there are quotas, there's a perception that somehow we're in this position simply because we're women and we won't be respected. To that I say these three things. Yes, I'm in this position because I'm a woman, but I'm also in this position because I'm bloody brilliant and I'm good at my job and I give 110%. And second, for centuries, there's been an unwritten quota for white, privileged men. Number 3, you had better start respecting us women because you're going to be seeing a lot more of us. That soon the balance of power will shift to us. And we won't be the first to introduce quotas to the judiciary. Do you know why? Because Belgium's constitutional court has already done that. It's already introduced a gender quota requiring the court to be comprised of at least a third of women. But we can do better than that. Incrementalism has clearly failed. So what are we going to do? Wait another 100 years and hope that suddenly, miraculously, we have gender equality? I want to see equality in my lifetime. And we deserve that. We should demand it, and we shouldn't settle for anything less than equality. Quotas are not radical, they're necessary. They're not the only solution, but they're certainly a huge part of it. So finally, I will leave you with this quote from Ruth Ginsburg, who was one of the 9 members of the US Supreme Court. And she spent her life fighting against gender discrimination. And she said this: "So now the perception is, yes, women are here to stay. And when I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And I say, when there are 9, people are shocked. Can you imagine? Wow. But there have been 9 men, and nobody's ever raised a question about that. So what I say is, yes, damn right we need quotas, but we need 100% quota for women. Because using a phrase from Hillary Clinton, thank you, Justin, it's our turn now. It's our turn to rule the world. And I think it'll be a damn sight better than the world we have at the moment. So thank you.
It's a shame to start with something like against. I don't like to start with the negative. I am a feminist, and I am very, very pro-equality of opportunity. And I think that is the crux of quotas, is that I don't feel it actually gives equality of opportunity. So there's a lot of support across the globe for increased female participation at leadership levels, and about time too. And there is a lot of frustration at the lack of progress. So I have a lot of sympathy for the fact that we do need to take action. We also have some excellent examples of action being taken. So for example, in Norway, it's a legislative requirement that at least 40% of the board members of listed companies are women. When that was first announced, it was thought, oh my goodness, they're going to crash and burn. But it didn't lead to the collapse of Norwegian companies, and perhaps that's an argument for quotas. In fact, apparently, Google is great, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands have also mandated quotas. However, if you dig a little bit deeper, there is also evidence that those quotas have failed to lead to broader organizational impacts. Basically, there is no trickle-down effect. And at the end of the day, if you're really about equality of opportunity, if you're really about fairness and justice, then it has to be for all. And one of the challenges with quotas is that it focuses solely at the board level, and it is a very, very heavy hammer for it to crack a nut, and I don't think that it's going to fix the problem at all. There's lots of issues and arguments around quotas. One of them, of course, is that they force change without changing the structure around them. So it forces women into the unenviable position of being a number, a token, that quota number, without changing the underlying structure, attitudes, or criteria for success. I remember being on a panel once, actually, and a gentleman talked about this example, and I repeat it often because I think it's so hugely impactful. He was a tall chap, and he married a very short lady, whose family apparently came from the hill country in Spain. And he'd never been there, so she took him home to meet the family. This is my lovely tall husband. And he went to go and meet her short family in the hill country. And when he went into the house, he had to duck. And every room, he had to duck. And the family said, it's been lovely to meet you, and so on and so forth. You know, how are you finding this? And he said, that's lovely, lovely family, lovely to be here in Spain, and so on and so forth. But by golly, you people build low houses. And it's like, no, we didn't build a low house. It suits us all fine. We're all short. And I thought, you know what? That is where we are at the moment, okay? We have structures. We need to change them. You can't force change and expect it to work. We can't suddenly put 20 tall people in the house and expect it to work. They're all going to get concussed and be deeply unhappy and want to move out, or ultimately they'll need to rebuild. Before this event this evening, I decided to poll just about every lady I came across as to what they thought about quotas. And what was fascinating is almost all of them said that they were not in favor of quotas, that they felt that they really wanted to achieve and progress and get there on the basis of their own merits and their own qualifications. In a sense, quotas is almost against natural justice. How can a quota be fair? There's also a stigma attached to quotas. Those filling a quota risk not being seen as legitimate. Women are constantly on the back foot before they start, facing the perception that they are there because of their gender, and so they will be seen as less qualified. This will hurt their ability to contribute to board discussions and undermine their effectiveness. And as we all know, when you're a single woman in the room, and I'm sure many of you have had that experience, I certainly have, that you're just regarded as an oddity, an exception, a jester, and frankly, not taken seriously. One of my other concerns about quotas, and it's a very real one because I think it applies to a number of different gender initiatives, is whether we are setting up women to fail through quotas. It's all very well putting them into a role, but if they are not wanted, and if they are not taken seriously, and if the structure is not there to support them, and if the measures are wrong, then they will fail. And I think that those women who do go into those roles are incredibly brave. I think they are warrior women who are clearing the path. But that leads to yet another issue, which is, are they the right role models? One of the challenges around gender equality is around role modeling. And too many of our women in the senior positions are frankly outstanding. They are stunning. They are amazing women. And that leaves so many other women feeling completely inadequate and left behind. Because let's face it, if you've got a board of 12 men, is every one of them absolutely stunning, outstanding, terrific at their job? No, half of them are mediocre. So what we really need is more mediocre women to fill up the positions where there are mediocre men. But I make an important point in terms of role modeling. We need to make sure that when we're putting people into these positions, that it is realistic and they are actually going to succeed, and that they provide the inspiration for the talent coming through. Because as I started with, one of the challenges with quotas at the moment is that it provides a temporary fix at the top, but it doesn't actually change anything. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm passionate about, is real change. One of the other areas to consider, of course, is the psychology being a lawyer, that always freaks me out, the psychology around quotas. And the psychology, according to research, is that if you are constantly told what to do, then you won't actually feel enthusiastic or empowered or part of that decision-making process. And one of the most important things around diversity and the gender agenda is that everyone feels part of it. It's so important to bring everyone with you. Rather than having a quota or a system or a decision imposed upon you, it's far more better to actually achieve change from within so that everyone feels included rather than excluded, as the case may be. So from my point of view, do I want to be a woman in a man's world? And I feel that quotas are putting me into that position. Or would I like to be a woman in a world of equality of opportunity? And frankly, I feel that if we change the structure, but not the measures of success, we risk setting women up to fail. That we put women in roles as part of a quota, and we put them there where they have to fight against all the odds to remain, and where there's a negative perception in terms of their role as well. So what I am for very much is for targets, and targets are different from quotas. And as I said, I have many years of experience in the financial services sector, and I'm very passionate about the Women in Finance Charter, and I feel that that is an initiative which can truly deliver change. It has targets. It has accountability. It has publicity, which is transparency. And it is also very much linked to pay. So it kind of goes straight to the points where we really can drive change. Not as a would-be nice to have, not as an optional extra, not as something that we quite think is a good idea but not quite sure how to do it. But that particular initiative offers real opportunity and a structure to deliver real change and in a long-lasting fashion. So I'm not interested in a headline solution for here and now. I'm interested in a solution that's going to deliver change for the women of today and the women of tomorrow. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce the panel to now give their kind of final statement in summing up. So if I could ask Catherine to give your final statement for quotas, please.
Well, I mean, what struck me listening to the against side this evening is how different barriers look depending on who you are and where you're sitting. I don't know how many of you have even thought about the fact that we're sitting here on an all-white panel, an all-middle-class panel, because I've certainly been thinking about it. And to be honest, that's something else I don't normally do, is agree to participate in all-white panels. But I didn't pay enough attention on this one. And that's also true about this question about the only solution. I think quotas are an absolutely essential part of the toolkit for reaching change quickly. But on their own, they will only have limited impact, but they will still have impact. What they will do is they will increase the diversity of workplaces, of legislatures. They will increase the different lived experience that is brought to the table, and this is incredibly important. And they will also stop women being so isolated. I was very struck by the way that Justin described the US election, because one of the things about what actually happened with Hillary was that it wasn't just a question about her being a bad candidate. There was also a huge amount of prejudice and misogyny that was playing out against her all the way through. You know, that journalist who said, I don't know about you, but whenever I see Hillary Clinton, I instinctively cross my legs. That sort of stuff is there. And she failed. When she failed, immediately she failed as a woman, because women are only ever allowed to own their failures. One of the reasons this is a numbers game is because when there are more women out there, it will become more normal. There will be less focus on, is this woman failing as a woman, or is this, you know, I agree with Vivian, mediocre women. I would like to see the opportunity for women to do as badly as men, as well as us always having to be better than men. So, you know, I agree with the other side on this one, but I think quotas are absolutely essential, and I urge those of you who voted against before this to change your vote now. And
Catherine, thank you. And Justin, over to you for final statements.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of slightly, on the Hillary versus Barack thing, look, they both faced quite outrageous, but entirely predictable attacks on them, some of them overt, most of them actually covert. And Obama, I think it's fair to say, faced just as many of those as she did, and was also subject to this terrible thing of, if you are the first in any respect, then you kind of own the thing. And if you cock it up, you know, the word goes out then, oh, well, we had a black president, it was a disaster, just as with Hillary, if she'd won. Or we had a woman candidate and it was a disaster. That kind of ownership was, I think, felt by both of them. But, you know, my point about him and his candidacy is that he was better able to cope with it because he had a range of other things to say. And that's not a criticism of Hillary Clinton as a person or as a politician, to say that her setup was affected by this sense that actually all they needed to say was that it's our turn. So that's the point, the reason why I brought her up. More than that, though, I think it's really what Vivian was saying about targets. I mean, we have on the Today programme this constant battle where we were very late to grasp that that we didn't sound normal. We didn't sound, you know, in a way that Parliament has also been late to grasp, but has worked towards just reflecting the nation as it is. And all sorts of arguments were made in the past, or we just can't find women experts, or they don't want to come forward. They're looking after the kids at that time in the morning, or whatever. And in the end, all of them were picked away, and a succession of editors, actually not just women editors, although we have a woman editor at the moment, realized that through targeting, not through quotas, but through saying to producers and saying to people putting on programs, look for people, persuade people when they need persuading, do the work that is necessary to do, that actually that is the way to do it. And so you get, you know, a woman expert on the Today programme who might not have been there 10 years ago, or frankly even 5 years ago, who's not there through any quota system, who doesn't feel herself that she's there through any quota system, but is there because of a change in attitude that is that goes right up and down an organisation. And it's the change of attitude that I think we're arguing for on this side, a change of attitude that has the same end goal, a change of attitude that probably doesn't get to that end goal as quickly, but a change of attitude, as I was saying, that doesn't throw up all sorts of other problems in its wake.
Justin, thank you. And Charlotte?
Well, Justin, I hope you extend that invitation to me as a barrister. I'm very happy to be invited onto your programme should you ever need an expert and you need a woman. I don't mind taking that position at all. But I just want to respond to just a couple of points that have been raised. In respect of Obama, I was elated when he was elected president. I cried at the thought. I couldn't believe that he had been elected the first black president of America after obviously the great strides and difficulties that a lot of African-American citizens had faced. But what's important to note is that black men had the right to vote in America before women. We have a black president before we have a woman president. Now, I'm not meaning at all to pit gender against race. It's about intersectional inequalities. But Hillary was given a much harder time because she was a woman. And to focus upon her intellectual arguments about feminism and the need for gender representation is just one aspect of her whole political campaign that the media honed in on, whilst not recognising all of the other issues that she was very vigorously campaigning about. And in fact, I had the pleasure of going to actually see her speak when she was running her campaign when I was at Harvard, and she spoke about the drugs campaign and the need to end that, and obviously the difficulties with the border in America with Mexico. And I thought she did an extremely good job, but was it covered in the media? No. But her very difficult relationship with Bill Clinton, on the other hand, that was given mass exposure and was certainly played upon by Donald Trump and others. And one of the second points that's been raised is that as I suspected would be, that quotas for women are patronising and that we won't be taken seriously. But we're not taken seriously anyway. That's the reason why we need quotas. And thirdly, we need to bring everyone, apparently, with us so that no one feels excluded. And that's why we need targets, and that's why we need incremental change. Well, that's already happening, isn't it? That's why we're arguing for quotas. The fact is, we are not being brought with that change. We need more women in positions of power. That's the whole purpose of having quotas. And one of the other issues that was touched upon is Parliament, or the need to have more women in politics. And in fact, the Labour Party is the only party with more women MPs than any other. And part of the reason for that is all women shortlists. That is a quota. It's a quota that's within legislation, and it shows that it works. I have yet to hear an argument on the against side that is at all convincing. I mean, of course, I do have very set views. I mean, that goes without saying. It's very difficult to convince me. But I haven't even heard of anything remotely compelling. So over to you.
Not quite. Over to Vivian to finish the summing up, please.
Well, I'm so sorry that there's absolutely nothing compelling about me or my arguments. Because I have to say, there's been an awful lot that's been spoken about this evening that I am in passionate agreement with. And I think one of the challenges we have is that we have got a wide-ranging debate. We're talking generally about equality of opportunity for women, about equality for gender. And in that, there can be no disagreement, none whatsoever. But the question this evening is not that, okay? The question this evening is quotas the right way to go? And that's where Justin and I are of the feeling that quotas are not the right way to go for a number of reasons, because there's an instinctual sense of unfairness, and that's just not my view. I did actually ask a whole range of people of lots of different age disparity, ethnicity, and such like when I was canvassing views for this, and everyone felt the same, that there is an innate unfairness in being there just because of your gender, that actually you want to be there because you're valued, because you're outstanding at what you do, because it's the right thing, and because people want you there. And in order to get there, we need to change some other bits and pieces as well. But we are getting there. I mean, look at the room this evening, okay? It's mostly women, which is amazing. It's fantastic. And it's really good to see so many men as well, so that we're not all women talking to each other, because that's really unhelpful. We need proper ambassadors out there to take us on this journey, okay? So from my perspective, I think that quotas are not the right solution because they're crude and they're not going to deliver results. Because at the end of the day, I don't want a token. I don't want a one-off headline. I don't want a gesture, okay? I actually want real change for equality of opportunity for all women of all generations, of all backgrounds, and that's not just for today, that's for tomorrow as well. There isn't a silver bullet. There's lots of different ways and lots of different things we have to do to get there. So let's do those things and not get sidetracked by a concept that's flawed. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. May I thank all four of you for being very inspiring thought leaders and sharing your perspective, experience and views today. I think everybody's found it really motivating and empowering for the audience. So thank you all. Now though, the work of the panel is done. So the arguments for and against have been cast, the summing up has reached its conclusion, and it's over to you guys in the audience to vote on for or against. So there should be a web address up there. I think we've all got Wi-Fi. Is everyone clear on what they need to do? So the results are coming in of 43% against and 57% for. So big hands. For the guys on my left, I guess they wish they hadn't seen it graphically, because it actually looks much more stark on a bar chart. So many congratulations to Catherine and Charlotte on being the victors of tonight's debate. huge congratulations also to Vivian and Justin for their beautifully articulated against arguments. And that concludes our legal debate for tonight. So thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the evening and safe trip. Thank you. Thank you.